You're listening to episode 6 of What She Wishes You Knew.
And she looked over at me, and my maiden name was Coop, and she said, "Connie Coop, hello there, how are you?" And I remember almost having to turn around and leave because I was going to cry.
Right.
Because she saw
you.
me. She saw who I was. Now, she didn't know about what had happened.
Right. Welcome to What She Wishes You Knew, the podcast that brings you the messy, beautiful stories of women from all walks of life with the goals of building connections, increasing empathy, and just loving each other better. Hey, welcome back, friends. I'm so excited that you're here. Hey, before we get rolling with this next episode, I need to do a shout out to a special listener, Pack NW Mama, who left us this review. She first starts out, love, love, love. She speaks my language. I can't say enough how much I love these podcasts. Kathleen has brought to the table what we need in such a divided society. Amen, sister. Kathleen has a way about her that is as if she were taking you by the hand. Aw, as she guides you to the sofa to sit and relax while you have coffee with her and share what's going on in your life. Okay, I love this picture here. As you share, she listens compassionately and envelops you with the warmthness of someone with whom you have been friends with your whole life. Okay, you just spoke sweet words to my heart, Pack NW Mama. Thank you so much for taking the time to write that. I often stop and think about this imagery you've created of sitting on the couch with a friend, and it reminds me before I hit record, that's what I'm doing. So thank you for taking the time. And friends, you could do the same. It's weird in Apple Podcasts. If you leave a comment or if you review, it helps other listeners find us who don't know about us. So you could be like her and you could say nice things. You could say not nice things, but I might cry. If you want me to cry, I guess you could leave me something. I'm not going to cry, honest. I just love to hear back from you. It's fabulous to get feedback from my listeners. It's been so fun to hear from those of you who have reached out to me already, and I really do mean it. I want to hear from you. So I'd love to play your voice on my podcast, which would just require you to use your phone recorder. Some of our phones say voice memo, and then it has a little share button after you record where you could send it to my email. And I mean it. Kathleen@whatshewishesyouknew.com is my email address. Not addressed. It's my email address. Send me some feedback. And thanks again, Pack Northwest Mama. Friends for life, you and me. That's right. Okay, on with the show. Today's episode, I can't wait for you to listen to. It's with my very good friend, Connie Baker, who is a licensed therapist. She is going to talk to us about the grief and the loss of losing your church. In her case, booted out of her church, losing everything when she was asked to leave. She's got a phenomenal story. It's heartbreaking. You're going to learn a lot too. There's going to be things that you maybe have never thought about, friend. Like, that's probably happening to you often with this podcast. She first taught me about abuse 2014, I think, is when I did some administrative work for her. She was looking for somebody to help her put on a seminar about religious abuse. And I was like, I can run a slide projector and I can help you, put together a workbook. And so I worked for her, and then I learned about abuse, and I did not even have a clue until I started helping her put together her material, and then attending seminars and helping her produce a course online about helping people heal from religious abuse. She is a wellspring of knowledge because she has gone through it. And you may notice there's a theme here. I like to ask people who are knowledgeable about something, but also I like to learn and hear from people who have lived it. And she has lived this. I mentioned that she is a counselor, and she specializes in trauma recovery. She's considered a trauma recovery specialist. She's been a seminar and a university teacher, a conference speaker, and newly an author. She's a new author. Her book just came out this summer. It's called Traumatized by Religious Abuse: Courage, Hope, and Freedom for Survivors. She also runs a Facebook group called Overcoming Religious Abuse, and it's, as of the date of this recording, has about 400 members in it. So y'all, this is a thing. And I'm probably going to end up having her back on the show for season 2 when we talk about all things abuse and trauma. Yeah, I know all the exciting things we talk about here, but they're good and they're helpful, and we need to talk about them. I'm excited for you to hear from her and her story. And I know that there are many of you who have similar stories. And I hope that through our discussion, you feel affirmed and validated. And those of you who've lost your church family, maybe it wasn't as traumatic or maybe not as messy as Connie's story, but if you lost your church family, it's a big deal. Connie's going to talk about that grief. She's going to also give us some practical tips. What could we do for someone in a situation like hers, or someone like you maybe, if you've lost a church family at some point? What can we do as a community to be supportive? How can you be a loving, supportive friend? And she's going to talk about things that people did that felt good, and then some things that just felt horrid. So, without further ado, let's get to my interview with Connie A. Baker. Connie Baker.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being on the show, friend.
You are so welcome. I am thrilled to be here.
Okay, let's talk about thrilling. I am so excited for you to be here that I actually had trouble sleeping last night. I think I got about 3 hours of sleep, friend.
Oh, Kathleen, you need to find a life, sweetie.
Thank you so much, friend, for taking time to be on here. I know you lead a very busy life. You have a full clientele in your therapy business. Is that what we call it? Not a business.
Sure. Yeah, my therapy practice.
Practice. That's the word I was looking for. I know that you're running a Facebook group and you're doing webinars, and you are a busy lady. So thank you so much for spending your time with us. I'm so excited because, listeners, Connie Baker is probably one of my most favorite people in the world, besides my husband and my children. And I was going to say my dog, but I don't know. I think you beat Murphy.
Okay, see, I love Murphy, so that means a lot to me. And Kathleen, you know very much the same. There are not only a tiny handful of people more significant in my life than you.
You're sweet,
very
sweet
dear
lady.
to me.
Okay, so the other reason why I'm super excited that you're here is that your story, I sort of did a little sensational thing when I titled the episode by saying that you were excommunicated from your church, which is, I think is probably what we would say happened, but I tried to make it a little juicy.
Right. And it was a little more nuanced than that, but it ended up being the same thing. I was asked to leave. So, yeah.
What I'm thrilled with you talking to us about today, about you losing your church family, the grief and the loss that came along with that, is I've actually had other women approach me. When they heard we were going to be talking about this, are so excited to hear what you have to say. Because as you know, being excommunicated from your church is not the only way that you can lose your church family, your church community.
Correct.
There's lots of other ways. There's lots of women who have experienced this same grief and loss, be it they got divorced and no longer felt they could be a part of their church. There's just a myriad of situations that can happen. And so this is a common thing. So I'm excited for us to hear your story and what that felt like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It is so common, Kathleen. It is, and it is so devastating. I mean, that's on a spectrum. Some people lose their church community and it's sad for a while. Other people on the other end of the spectrum lose their church community and it just about wipes them out. They almost can't handle it because it's so significant and there's so much meaning in it.
Yeah, I'm excited for you to bring some affirmation to those who have lost that, who may not, who need it, who need to be affirmed. I'm going to quote your book for a second because it's a fabulous quote. Your book, Traumatized by Religious Abuse, it said, the grief around losing a religious community can last even years longer than the grief of losing a loved one to death.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So this is a big deal.
It is.
It's a really big deal. So I'm excited to hear your story. I've told my listeners a little bit about you already, but I have a question that I don't think I know the answer to, and I would really love to hear the answer.
Bring it.
You are a therapist. I want to know what made you want to become a therapist and go into that career.
Great question. And I don't remember a lot of the specifics, but what I do remember is I was a pastor's wife for several years in my early 30s, and I really loved working with people and trying to bring healing and growth and change into their life. And one of my memories about it was how frustrating it was to me when I got to the end of what I knew how to do and how to help a person. I was so frustrated that I could not go deeper, that I didn't have more tools, more awareness. I was coming from a pastoral angle there, which I think can be very valid and a beautiful form of counseling. But I wanted to get into the mental health nitty-gritty. And so I started realizing I wanted more tools in that area.
Were you an actual pastor, or were you on staff?
I was a pastor. I was a pastor's wife. Actually, at that point, we were in a denomination that actually the senior pastor kept asking me why I wouldn't get ordained because I had the Bible college for it and I had all that. But at that point, I had a baby and, I was taking care of my babe. And so I was a pastor's wife. I was really involved. For my sanity's sake, while I had an infant and toddler, I volunteered in some really big ways. So...
So as a pastor's wife, then you just sort of, is that just kind of a thing? If you're a pastor's wife, you end up sort of taking on that role?
Sometimes. And I think people were drawn to me just because I showed a bit of emotional intelligence sometimes, and they wanted to be able to, either get my input or, have me just present to help them carry really some heavy loads in their life.
Okay, speaking of emotional intelligence, I know a little bit about you and your childhood.
Kathleen, are we really going to go here?
Yes, we are. They have to hear this, Connie. They have to hear. Tell my listeners what kind of books you were reading as a 10, 11, and 12-year-old.
Okay.
Because I think you showed signs of this emotional intelligence possibly very early on in your life. Maybe.
Or I showed signs of being a nerd or other things. Yes. Okay, so when I was around 10 years old, there was a book. I don't know how old our listeners are on this, but I'm 54. So this was back in the 70s. There's a book that came out by Tim LaHaye. I was raised evangelical. I read all Christian evangelical stuff growing up. And so this book by Tim LaHaye came out. He was not known for the Left Behind series at that point. He was known, he wrote a book on the temperaments. And there were the 4 temperaments, and I gobbled that thing up. I was like, this is so interesting. And many adults in my community, in my church, were reading it too. And I was talking with them about it, like, okay, so how much sanguine are you? No, how much choleric are you? And I mean, oh my gosh, I'd go through, and I just gobbled it up. Now,
and you're 10.
I'm 10.
Yeah.
Now, if that were not bad enough, in the nerd department, then I turned 11-ish. I know I was not over 12. I think it was 11, maybe early 12. I decided it would be very enlightening for me to read James Dobson's book, Dare to Discipline. which those of you who were around then know is a parenting book on how to discipline your kids. And I found that intriguing. Why? I don't even. But I found that very intriguing at 11. And the next year I decided, well, hey, you wrote another book on hide or seek, on a kid's self-image. Let's do it. So I read that too.
Yeah, I know why. I know why you were interested in those things, because you were meant to be a therapist someday.
Well, that is a very what would I call that? A very positive frame for my nerdish behavior. Thank you, Kathleen.
I think there were just signs there of an emotional intelligence and a curiosity about things.
Huge curiosity.
Yeah, that would lead you into what you're doing today and helping many people.
It's so true.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, Connie, we're gonna dive into your story here in a minute. You say in your story, which is woven throughout your book, Traumatized by Religious Abuse. We'll talk more about that at the end, how people can find that. But you say in your book that the church was your lifeblood. Prior to you being excommunicated, it was your lifeblood.
Yes.
Can you tell us what that means? How is it your lifeblood?
You bet. Well, I had a history as a child of church meaning a huge amount to me. When I left for college, I didn't miss my mom and dad that much. Hopefully mom's not listening. I didn't miss them that much. Actually, she knows that. I missed my church really badly in Southern Oregon. And so it's always been a very heart thing for me. It comes from my heart. And so then I started going in, when I moved to Portland to go to college, I started going to this church that I adored. They were a bit trendy, avant-garde. They were doing new and different things. They were viewing certain things differently. And I was absolutely intrigued. And the interesting thing is, I know many people here almost 30 years later that went to that church at the same time. And when we talk about that church, it almost invariably comes up that it was our favorite church we have ever been to. It kind of felt magic in some ways. It was just something about it had this vitality and beauty and creativity about it that was just hard to explain. And I gave my soul to that place. I was a Bible school graduate. I went there my senior year in Bible school, and then for several years after that. And I waited tables so that I could earn fast, quick money to be able to give all the rest of my time to work at the church.
Wow. So did you find you were at the church often?
That would be understated. Yes, I practically lived there. Yes.
Yeah.
I was there a lot.
Yeah. And they were your whole social circle, right?
Whole social circle. I mean, I graduated, okay, so this is over a few years, about 6 years. I attended that church from 83 or 4, I'm forgetting. No, 84 to 90, to 1990. So, yeah, over a 6-year period, things changed, but I was in and out of that place. I spent a lot of time there. I invested. Yeah. What was your question?
Yeah, you just said it was your lifeblood, so I was curious what that meant to you.
I gave so much. I was on so many teams, working teams there. I was heading to the mission field. The church was going to be a huge part of my sending, not just a mission agency. The church itself was going to be a big part of my sending team. And so, yeah, just invested. I, led kids productions, musical productions, did all kinds of things in that context.
You were a face that people knew probably then.
Oh, big time. Big time. It was only a church of around 500 or so. So I was very high profile. Yes.
Okay. So let's get into it. We talked a little bit about what life was like for you prior to being asked to leave. Mm-hmm. Tell my listeners what happened.
Within the first 2 weeks of me attending that church, I met one of the pastors, and he was 3 years younger than my dad, so he was like a father figure. He was married with several children, and I told him, wow, I was 19 at that point. Wow, I was so impressed with this church. He said, hey, anytime you want to chat, come into my office, come in. And so we developed a really strong friendship, and through the next several years, he was one of the pastors. He helped, pave the way for my missions work, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Really gave me a lot of favor. And those of you who may feel where this story is going, it was part of the grooming process for what was going to, in 1990, I began to realize that there was sexual abuse going on, and he made sexual advances, and I was abused.
Wait. You said there was sexual abuse going on. You mean you saw other people were being sexually abused, or this happened to you?
To me.
To you.
Me. I realized in 1990 what was happening. Things shifted, and he became much more overt in his sexual advances at that point.
Okay.
And I was very naive. I didn't think anything about it before then. He was just like, I called him my dad in Portland. So at that point, he sexually abused me for 9 months, and I begged him to let me get out of the relationship and to talk to the church leadership so that I could feel a sense of protection. He was a very powerful personality. And he said he was going through some stuff at the same time emotionally. And he said, if you say something, I'm so unstable, I've got a gun by my bed and I might kill myself. So I was totally trapped. I was a raging codependent at that point in my life. I was rescuing everyone. I was, saving the world, and everybody's needs came before mine. So I remember thinking very clearly, this could destroy my life, but I will choose that over the possibility of his suicide being on my head, on my responsibility.
I want to ask you a question. You mentioned you begged him to let you go to the elders of the church.
Correct.
What were you hoping that they would do?
That they would protect me, that they would stop, that they would separate me, put a wedge between him and I.
You were hoping that maybe they would make him stop what he was doing.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. So he's now told you, if you tell someone, I'm going to kill myself.
Right.
And you've decided you can't risk that.
Right.
So then what do you do?
Well, I finally, about 8 months in, eight and a half months into what I was clear was the abuse, because again, didn't happen in a vacuum. It seemed to come out of nowhere for me, but in retrospect, it didn't. I left to go to Southern Oregon temporarily. I quit my job, though. I mean, I didn't know how temporary. I left. It's a little bit complicated, but basically he decided, I told him, if you don't tell the elders by a certain date, I'm going to. And then he came back and finally told, when I say the elders, there was no difference between the elders and the pastoral staff. They were one and the same in this institution. So I'll use those interchangeably. He wrote a letter saying he left town. He was gone for 3 weeks. No one knew where he was at. So he left town, sent a letter to the elders, and a copy of it to me. I immediately left Southern Oregon, like that day, came back up because I wanted to meet with the pastoral team and try to explain what had gone on, although I didn't fully understand it was abuse at that point at all. But I was so broken at that point. I was so my integrity was shot in my own mind. I felt shame, guilt, horror at what I'd done. So I was hoping beyond hope to come back to the church leadership and find some space to process what had happened and get some support. Now, I knew that I might not get it. It was terrifying. It could go either way in my mind at that point.
What made you think that it might not go well?
The history of the place.
Tell us about that. What's the history?
Well, I just seen they prided themselves in public church discipline.
What does that mean? Public church discipline?
They would either make an announcement about a member who they said was in sin and that they were not welcome in the church anymore. They would make that public. Or they would come back and or they would make the person themselves get up and confess their sin to be able to still attend the church.
Oh my gosh. Wow. But there's a part of you that thinks this is your fault?
Yes.
Is that why you think that they're not gonna respond well?
Absolutely.
Okay. But you're hoping that they really see what's going on.
Right.
Is that this was his deal.
Right. That they'd understand. Honestly, I think in an unconscious level, I was hoping they'd understand more than I did about the situation.
Yeah. Because you're young. You're what, 26, 25? 25 years old. Yeah.
So what happened is I came back and I did, oh gosh, I could tell stories about this, but I did come back. I talked to the elders and was held responsible for what happened.
Like held fully responsible?
No, I think they held him partially responsible, but
Okay.
they were treating it as an affair, an emotional affair.
Okay.
And so then I knew the drill. I had to get up and publicly confess my sin in the 2 services to basically get my name cleared in the congregation. And I was broken. I cannot even find words to describe how broken I was after the sexual assault and then being held responsible for it and taking the anger of the leadership team. Things being said to me like you're a threat to every married woman.
Wow.
You know, at 25 years old and sexually naive. I'm like, dude, you clearly don't get me if you think. But at that point, I was just so overwhelmed. I just took it all in. These were men. Remember, I gave my life for that place.
Yeah.
I thought these guys walked on water.
Okay, so this. I just have to say this.
Say it.
To my listeners. So we all have probably experienced something like this within our church families, where we are told that something sinful has happened. Mm-hmm. And the reality is we've been told the blame goes somewhere where it didn't belong. Right. So like we've been told, they were told you were the one that had the affair, when the reality was, no, you were sexually and spiritually abused. But everybody else doesn't know that, right?
No, it's called an emotional affair. And that's where I'm going to say this right now, and go ahead, send me emails. But
I'll send you emails.
I do. Yes, that's right. I do not believe there are pastors have affairs. If it is with someone in their own church, it is not an affair. Read my book because what I talk about is power differential. If there's a power differential in a sexual relationship, it is not an affair.
Okay, you mean a pastor can't have an affair if it's somebody within the church family?
Correct.
If this was the lady at Fred Meyer's.
Exactly. If it's a peer, if it's somebody with the same level of power in the relationship, that's an affair.
Okay.
But the power differential between me and my abuser, 18 years.
Yeah.
Male to female.
Yeah.
It was pastor to parishioner. They were just so really powerful personality with a very compliant personality. It was just, the power differential was over the top between, and threat with a weapon.
Right.
If he would have said he'd kill me, I think I'd have come forward.
Right.
I do. Yeah.
Right.
I think I'd have come forward.
Well,
but
because
he said he'd kill him.
Right, because you're the good Christian girl. You got to protect. You got to save.
I'm the codependent here. Right.
Got to do the kind thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Ugh.
That's the thing that I just want to, it's striking to me about your story, because here you are standing up in front of your church, your family, the people that you've given your lifeblood to for the last 6 years.
My most important people.
Your social circle. These are your people, right? Yeah. And you are telling them you had an emotional affair. Yes. And they believe you.
Do
they
totally
not?
Believe me.
They believe you. And so, but that wasn't the truth.
No.
That wasn't the truth. And so I just want to make a point of that to my listeners, that there may be times when and it isn't, I don't think it's that people are being deceptive, but they're angling stories. They're putting it together the way that's convenient or that makes certain people not look so bad.
Yes.
They're doing something with that story. You may not, and almost 95% sure you don't know the full story.
Right. That is correct.
And so we have to be so careful. Even though we think we've got the story, we may not have the story at all.
These people heard it from my lips.
Yes. Right.
And it wasn't true because I didn't
wasn't true.
understand it.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah.
In fact, about 20 plus years later, I gave this story in a public place where one of the people there heard it and she got mad. She ran up to one of my best friends and said, Connie is lying. I heard from her own lips that this was that she said what happened to her.
Right.
And, this was not necessarily a well person, but, she got really mad and,
right.
Laid into my best friend telling, I guess she didn't have the guts to come to me, but she, with my friend and said, she's lying. I heard her say.
Right. So you confess. Why do you confess? I mean, you mentioned you didn't know what really had happened. But why else? Was there any other reasons why you choose to stand up in front of two services of church?
So many, because it was beyond a living nightmare to do it. I write about it in the book, It was beyond a nightmare to get up there and confess. But why I did it is because I had carried so much horror and guilt and shame over those 9 months that I wanted absolution. I wanted to say it, to own it. Now, here, backstory, I was raised in a family that demanded responsibility for our actions.
Right.
Now, there's some good stuff to that, but it was really excessive in my home. I was made to feel responsible for other people's feelings, for how they were going to respond to something. And so my code of responsibility said, I have to take responsibility. I can't not. So I have to take full responsibility for all the horrible things I've done and hopefully find some relief in that.
Sure.
And so people don't, because here's the thing, if I would have said, I am not getting in front of the service, if I would have said that to the leadership, the narrative would have been, she's rebellious, she's unrepentant, and she needs to stay out of all of our lives.
Wow.
That would have probably put me under church discipline, formal church discipline.
Okay, you mentioned church discipline in your book. What did that mean, the church discipline? I mean, I'm thinking standing in front of your whole congregation and confessing feels like discipline to me. What other things could they have done to you?
Well, that's the irony. Everything happened to me exactly like I would have if I'd have been under horrible church discipline.
Right?
Because they told me, we want you to go to Southern Oregon, go back and stay with your parents. Okay, I'm now turning 26. I literally drove home with all my stuff in my car on my 26th birthday. Aww. So I'm like, I have no life down there. I have no life in Southern Oregon. I have nothing. But they're telling me what I need to do. Had I said, no, I'm going to stay in Portland, same narrative. She's rebellious, she's unrepentant, she's not doing what the elders have asked her and told her to do.
And so at this time, so you're asked to leave.
Yes.
So what happens to this pastor who's hurt you?
Well, the point of me leaving, the stated point was, we need you to go to Southern Oregon because this man and his family and his marriage need to heal here.
They don't need to give up their whole life.
No.
But you do.
I'm a female. I'm not a pastor. I am single.
Yeah.
And I am utterly dispensable.
You are disposable.
Yeah.
They disposed of you.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, friend. Yeah. I've heard that story so many times, and I still feel my eyes get wet when I think about you standing up on that stage and confessing to something that was not your fault.
Yeah.
It's, I just don't even know. Okay, so tell us, you go home to Southern Oregon.
Right.
You've lost everything.
Yes.
Your career, the possibility of becoming a missionary.
Yep.
You go home. What happens? How are you feeling? How are you coping? What does life look like there now?
Life looks like asking a few huge questions. Number one, do I want to stay alive? Do I want to live after this? I have nothing. My thought at that point was, why bother? Everything that has been important to me. And this is a 26-year-old brain, that is new in life. But at that point, I had nothing. And even in retrospect, it's like, that's kind of true. I had to start completely over. Now, when you're 54, you go, yep, that happens, and I can do it. I can start over again. When you're 26, there ain't nothing.
Hey, let me ask you this before you continue. You had a lot of friends at that church.
Yes, almost all. I had a few friends outside the church that were very dear to me. Some of those dropped me like a hot potato. Other ones stayed with me, but then I was out of geographical space with them. And this was before the internet.
You did have some people that reached out to you and maintained that friendship, but mostly people just dropped you.
Yeah, they just didn't know what to do with it. Here's Connie, the golden child, who's going overseas as a missionary, who's always kept her nose completely clean.
Right.
And now she's in an emotional affair with a married man. They did not know. I had people in the church. This was probably, we're talking about grief here. My identity was central to what I lost here. My identity. Several people came up and said, I don't even know who you are anymore.
And you were like, neither do I.
And a part of me interestingly did. I was like, I'm still me. I mean, I didn't say that. I couldn't talk back, so to speak.
Right,
but I'm like, I'm who I've always been. I don't know what just happened, but I'm who I've always been. But they came up saying, you're not. You're a fake. You're a liar. You are. We do not trust who you say you are anymore.
Wow. No grace. There was no grace there at all.
Very little.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you brought up identity, because in your book, which I love, there is a chapter about the damages of spiritual abuse. But I think it relates also to this loss, and this grief. You talk about loss of identity, and you list career, intellectual, social, and theological. And you say in your book, I really would love to hear theologically what this did to you after losing everybody.
Well, that kind of goes, Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you said in your book that theological is the most difficult.
Well, this goes back to my story of several questions. Do I want to stay alive was number one. Number two, do I believe in a God anymore?
Yeah.
Number three, if I choose to do that, do I want to hang around his church?
Okay, so back up for a second. Why? I know why, but can you explain to our listeners why this causes you to question whether there's even a God? What happened there? Can you connect the dots for us?
Yeah. I think I'll connect them in the way I did. I think there's several ways to connect those dots.
Okay.
How I did is this pastoral team, in my mind, of that church spoke for God. They functioned as a unit. So there wasn't a senior pastor. So there wasn't like one senior pastor and staff. They were all theoretically equal in power within this pastoral elder team. And so the whole, the word on the street in the church was kind of like, well, gosh, if all of them agree on this, we can really trust that.
Right.
If all of them agree, we trust that that's God talking.
Right.
And so this happens. And the other issue is when it comes to God and spiritual life, I was so damaged. It was probably 3 to 4 years before I felt like God wanted anything to do with me. You know how they talk about the heavens being brass? I didn't even bother to pray through those years. I mean, because I'm like, I'm not being heard.
Clearly.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, you're not being heard because you've sinned, or why are you not being heard?
I didn't know. God. I didn't know why God wasn't hearing me. Now, I mean, that's, my framework now.
Right.
Not my framework now. It's my framework then. But no, it was horrible. I tried to pray and there was just nothing. I mean, part of this is that elders had seared, I had opened my spiritual openness to them, and then the level of betrayal it's like it just seared, it just burnt that part of me and just shut it down.
Yeah.
So, and so then who is God? If I trusted these elders to speak for God, then God kind of hated me.
Yeah.
God kind of kicked me out of his team.
Right, because if they're hearing from God and they're in agreement that they're all hearing the same thing, what is the other conclusion?
Right. So the spiritual damage was immense. It was so immense. It took me about 10 years, partly because I didn't understand what had gone on. This is my heart in writing my book, is I always say, this is the book that I needed back then.
Right.
Because I did not understand what I'd gone through.
Yeah.
It was so profoundly confusing.
And so I just can't even imagine the grief that you're experiencing now that you're back at your mom and dad's. I mean, it touched every single area of your life, did it not?
It did. And, the other one we haven't touched on that I think is losses when it comes to leaving a church is reputation.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yes.
Massive. To me, identity and reputation lead. Besides the social circle and the friends, which are super significant, the personal losses often are identity and reputation. And they were for me.
And do you feel like that then that causes sort of a blackballing in the Christian community? Did you feel like you got blackballed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yes. And that was meant to happen by the leadership. I mean, they were saying, no, she is now on the outs.
Devastating.
She's not trustworthy. She is not capable of living a Christian life at this point.
Yeah. I love in your book, you talk about people going through this theological damage.
Oh, man.
And this questioning. And what I love about it is you affirming people who are questioning that this is a normal and natural thing that will happen in this type of situation.
And sometimes productive.
Oh, really?
Not just normal, natural, not just okay. Sometimes it's essential and productive.
Yeah, I love you. I'm going to quote you again. It's okay to wrestle with these questions of, can we still believe what we were taught? What we were taught we believed is true. And you said, it's okay to doubt. It's okay to go back to the beginning and reconstruct a more functional picture of God. Is that what you're talking about then?
Totally.
Right.
And then sometimes it is essential that we go back and reconstruct a more functional picture of God.
It's part of growing as a Christian, I believe.
Yes,
is to
absolutely.
take those things that you were taught in your youth and hold them up and then decide, is that true? Is that true? Yeah.
And I think most adults, what I believe is that adults should, if they have been in the faith for a few years, there needs to be questioning. There needs to be going back and doubting and questioning and asking what needs to be asked. It's essential. What happens when something climactic happens, like happened to me, is it happens all at once. Everything gets stripped away.
Right.
For some people, it's much more subtle and through the years and that's fine too. But I think if we're growing spiritually, we're going to go through a process. But when you go through something traumatic with that level of grief and devastation, it happens all at once. The whole building topples. You're not just you're not redesigning rooms and what's the word? Not redecorating, but you're not just redoing the house little bits here and there. The whole thing just gets leveled, and then you have to rebuild it. If it's a point in time thing like happened to me.
You mention in your book about reconstructing your worldview.
Yeah.
You use the reconstruct word.
You do. Most people do. Interestingly, though, Kathleen, I will say this. Timing is always interesting to me. When I work with clients who've gone through religious abuse, some of them immediately back away from religion and or spirituality like a hot potato.
Yeah.
And say, no go.
Sure.
I am so out.
Right.
What happened with me is my identity and my whole sense of self, I realize now, could not leave evangelicalism at that point. It was too much a part. I had already lost so much. I was already so untethered. I was already, my life was one huge question mark. That was all I'd ever known.
You couldn't afford to lose another thing?
I could not.
Yeah.
I could not afford to lose another thing.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting kind of back in pretty quickly into the church groove and staying there for another decade plus, really kind of in the, right back in evangelicalism before I really hit crisis and said, wow, I'm being damaged by this because of what I've been through and what I'm, how I'm processing it.
Did the people in the churches you attended in Southern Oregon after you went back home the final time, did they know what had happened?
No.
No. Yeah.
No, I was silent about it for years.
I bet you were.
And I slowly started telling people little bits, like maybe about year 3 or 4. But those first couple years, now I told my then-to-be husband, not to recommend this, but we started dating 6 months after I moved home. Not a recommendation. But, I think there were some things that, God knew needed to happen there. Anyway, I told him right off the bat, and he was the first person who said, that was abuse.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, there might have been abusive parts. He's like, no, it was abuse. And so he was a godsend to start planting that seed and for me to start processing it. And it took me 3 years to even figure out that it was sexual abuse, let alone what had gone on the spiritual abuse end.
Now, and your husband at the time, he's a pastor at the time you meet him?
He had been a pastor. He was not at that point. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that it just feels so like divine appointment to me that you met him? Here is a man who was a pastor and he's saying to you, no, this was wrong. Right. Do you think that played a part in you being able to accept what he was saying was true?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, him being male and a pastor. Because at that point, I'm a little 26-year-old. I started dating him when I was still 26. I'm a little 26-year-old that still is very patriarchal in her thinking because that's how I'd been raised.
Sure.
So for a man and a pastor to say that carried extra authority, let alone it being the same gender.
Right, which is what you needed right then in that moment.
It was what I needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
How did you deal with that depression? I'm assuming that's when you say you were considering whether you should still stay living. How did you deal with that depression?
Well, I went to a really bad counselor. That did not help. A very bad Christian counselor that basically said, yeah, so what was your responsibility in this? Oh. Thank God I didn't keep going to her. But then about 3 years later, I went to a wonderful woman, another Christian counselor, who was like, yeah, that was so sexual abuse. This is crazy. Let's talk, and was a huge gift to me.
Yeah.
Huge gift. And so my depression, I wish I had been on medication at that time. I needed it so badly. I actually was also I was so traumatized. I was going through panic attacks. I passed out in Mervyn's one time because in the middle of a panic attack. I mean, my system was a mess. So I was, I was dealing with major PTSD, anxiety, and depression at that point. I didn't understand what that was. I did not know. I knew I was depressed. I understood depression. But I didn't understand meds, or I'd have been, oh my gosh, I'd have been into a doctor immediately saying, give me some support here.
I need
so
some
it took
help.
me a lot longer to get better because my chemistry was screwed up for a long time. And so, honestly, the little irony here is that meeting my husband and thinking he was the cat's meow was actually good for my brain in an upper because, well, I could go into brain chemistry about about falling in love, but infatuation and sex are hit the same area of our brain as cocaine. The dopamine hits that, and we are happy.
Right.
So so in some ways, he was a bit of an antidepressant, and we dated long enough for those dopamine sprinklers to slow down, which was I recommend to everyone, because then you're dealing with the real person and not a drug.
Right.
But I do think God kind of knew this girl needs some extra support. And so I'm so grateful for that.
Oh, so grateful. I'm so grateful to him too. Well, friend, I want to bring you to the segment of the show where we try to give our listeners some practical tools, some tips on how we can love each other better.
Yes.
So I would love to hear your take on, and you can answer this however you like, if there were people in your life when all this was happening, when it all went down, that were supportive to you, what did they do? What did they say? Or if there weren't anybody, what would you have wanted?
Yeah. I love this part of your podcast, Kathleen. I think it's so brilliant. I just love that you're doing this. Because in my therapy office, I pick up a lot of pieces of things said to people that are just devastating, that we know are said in supposed to be trying to be helpful, maybe, but it's just not purposely mean, but just hard. So I love this part.
Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking mostly of what was said that wasn't helpful.
You could say that too.
What's said that would not have been helpful is, okay, so explain exactly what happened. We do this with divorce too. In other words, you tell me what happened, and I'll decide whether you're in the right or the wrong.
So what would have felt bad is somebody who wanted you to explain so they could determine who was at fault. That's what you're saying? Okay.
And evangelicals have a really high propensity for that.
Looking for who's at fault.
Yes, in a divorce, in a situation like this with abuse, with domestic violence, it's always like, well, tell me what happened, and then I'll decide if you're right or wrong, or how much at fault you were or not.
Yeah.
And that is so damaging.
Yeah.
And like I said before, one of the most hurtful things was, I don't even know who you are anymore.
Yeah.
Well, how about ask me?
Yeah. Oh, right.
Say, man, this is just so not like you, Connie. I'm just so confused. Talk to me. Where are you? Who are you? That's way different than them saying, in this accusatory tone, I don't know who you are anymore. In other words, you're a fake.
Yeah.
It's
condemnation.
It's such condemnation.
It's not, it's just so sad to me that there weren't people saying, how are you? How are you doing? This cannot be easy for you.
Oh, yeah. Just to ask to check up on my well-being and not to pry. See, that there's a fine line there, because those of us who, like me, who can easily check in on somebody's well-being, are very comfortable with that, will have a tendency to push too hard, to ask too much, too many questions if we're not careful.
Right.
Then there's the other people who have a tendency to go, oh crap, I don't want to open that bag. I don't want to open that can of worms. I don't know what to do with it if she does tell me how she's doing. There's a happy medium in there somewhere. Those people who are, they can afford to ask, or at least say, you're really on my heart.
Yes. Yes.
And those of us who can ask easily, to ask, but to give a lot of permission if they don't want to talk.
I love it.
I'm thinking, Kathleen, I'm thinking about a woman named Shirley, this woman was older than my mom by probably 10, 15 years, not quite old enough to be my grandma, but I knew when I got home I needed to talk to somebody. And it was probably within a month or two, I went to Shirley, and this woman, I feel emotional talking about it. I love her so much. She's already passed on, but I came and told my story to her, even a story I did not understand yet. And all she did was listen to me and love me and say, and see me for who I actually was, that she knew me growing up. She knew I was the same Connie,
Right.
but I'd gone through something really horrible and messy and confusing, and she just listened to me. And to this day, I just think, what a godsend that this older woman who, and I chose her carefully. I chose her because I trusted her wisdom and I trusted her grace. I trusted her to not have these rigid categories that were going to have to be put on everything I said.
Right.
And it was a good choice. I chose wisely
Yeah.
with her. I mean, she was an amazing
what
woman.
a gift. What a
And-
gift.
Oh, completely. And such a huge gift. She was part of the Sanity. So I probably would, I don't even remember how often I met with her, maybe every week or two. And I'd go over to her house and we'd just talk about however I was doing. And I mean, she was no therapist. I mean, she was not overly, skilled psychologically or anything like that, but she was a good, solid, wise, gracious woman who just held my story. And it's just beautiful. She's, grateful
So
to this
beautiful.
day. So,
And I've heard that same advice. I don't know that that's the right word, but I've heard the same thing from many of my guests. The thing that would feel good when you're in the midst of grief and loss, and in your case, trauma, just having somebody to listen and to see me. I mean, that's just beautiful. I just want to be seen. Because here's the thing, listeners. These sort of things don't happen in a vacuum. They never do. Somebody just doesn't, well, okay, maybe. But I don't think very often somebody just wakes up in the morning and they decide to do something horrible, right?
Yep.
Or, in your case, I wouldn't say that was horrible, but you did make some decisions that were really hurtful to you.
yeah.
You didn't just wake up one day and decide to accept that behavior
There's a
from
huge
him.
huge
Right.
context for how that happened.
That happened over a period of time that got you to where you were. And that's what makes me sad, is that people were unable to still see that you were still there. Just some things that happened over time. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's beautiful. That's really good, helpful stuff.
There's a story that comes to my mind. There was another older woman in the church who I just adored. And she was not the sort of person I necessarily go pour my heart out to, but she's a good, wonderful woman. And she is older than my mom, but she was waiting some tables that day at our little cafe in the town. And I remember walking in the door, and it was probably within the first few weeks I moved home, so I was a bleeding mess. And I walked in, and nobody could see that because I never show that, but I was dying. And she looked over at me, and my maiden name was Coop, and she said, "Connie Coop, hello there, how are you?" And I remember almost having to turn around and leave because I was going to cry.
Right.
Because she saw
you.
me. She saw who I was. Now, she didn't know about what had happened.
Right.
But it was like, because I'd had 500, well, actually, there's probably more like 1,000 or 1,500 people in the Portland area whose perception of me had now shifted.
Yeah.
They were reflecting back to me somebody that I was not.
Yeah.
And I thought I was. But this woman says that to me, and it was just, and she had no idea. I told her years later about what it meant to me, and she, of course, didn't even remember it, because we were friends. But she reflected back to me who I really was. That was so powerful. And both Shirley and this gal's named Joanne, both Shirley and Joanne were just powerful in that, I got to realize, oh, yeah, I guess I'm still me.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
The
very
other
powerful.
thing that's powerful about what we're saying here is that despite the fact that people believed the story that you had committed this great sin, we all, in those situations where we don't know, we even when the words are spoken from the person like you,
Yeah.
where you're confessing the sin that you did not commit, even when that happens and we feel the morality and heaviness of that issue, we can still love well. We can still support well. We can still care well. You know what I mean? We can do these things without having to say, we agree with what you've done.
Right.
There doesn't have to be, like, caring and loving someone and seeing them does not equate, I agree with everything you did and it's okay. Right?
Right.
It's not the same thing. And
No.
I think somewhere in the church, we are struggling with this right now, that if I do befriend you or love you or say supportive things or listen or hold your hand, I'm saying what you did is okay.
Right. And there's even yes. And it's, we don't have to live that way. The other part of this is that if people in the church had really reached out to me and been on my team, the culture of the church was dysfunctional enough that their standing in the church would have been questioned, subtly or overtly.
Exactly that too. That's the piece too that I was thinking about. I'm thinking about myself. If that was me sitting in your church and I'm your friend, would I feel comfortable with everyone seeing me walk up to you and hug you? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Well, and people did come up and hug me. There was a certain degree of I got feedback that day that was supportive, but once I left, I didn't hear from people. You know,
Right,
I mean,
right.
it was like, okay, and that's geographically that was difficult, and I get that, but there was a few people that sent me, a letter or card here and there. But if they'd have really said, I'm investing in Connie,
Right.
then it could have got really dicey for them.
Yeah, it could have. Yeah, and that's in the mix there. And that's one of the reasons why I feel so passionate about this podcast, is I'd love to see that changed in our
Yes.
culture. I really would, because
You
I think
and me both, girl. You
think-
know I'm on your team in that one.
it just is devastating to my heart to know that there are people that are hurting so desperately, and we add insult. We just add to it by pretending they're no longer in existence.
Yep.
And for some of my listeners, you're feeling that. You
Yes.
lost your church community, and you feel like nobody sees you anymore. And I just want you to know I see you. Connie sees you.
Yep, we do.
You're there, girl. You're there. Okay, Connie, we are about ready to go to our big reveal. But before we do that, I would like my listeners to know where to find you. So where can they find you? Social media? Where can they find your book? All that stuff.
Sure. Website, ConnieABaker.com. CONNIE, A Baker, BAKER, just like it sounds, ConnieABaker.com. I have a group on Facebook called Overcoming Religious Abuse Community. Would love it. It's for religious abuse survivors. I'd love it if you want to be a part of that. I have people who are survivors in there. I also have people in there who are wanting to learn about how to help survivors. So that's wonderful. I have a Facebook page, Connie A. Baker, MALPC, to differentiate it from any other Connie Baker. My book you can find on Amazon. It's again, Traumatized by Religious Abuse, Courage, Hope, and Freedom for Survivors. What else do I have going on,
You have an
Kathleen?
Instagram account, right?
I do. I'm working on it. It's there. I'd love you to follow me because I really am going to develop it. Theoretically, I'm on Twitter as well, but I don't even know about that. My team does some of that. So theoretically, I believe Instagram is Connie_A_Baker. I'm pretty sure something like that. Connie A. Baker. So see if you can find me.
We'll have all that in the show notes. So if people want to
Perfect.
find you, they can go directly to those links. Thank you.
Wonderful.
And as I've mentioned several times throughout our interview, it's a great book. I really cannot recommend it high enough. I own 6 copies. And the reason why I own 6 copies is one's for me and 5 are for people who need it, because there's a lot of people out there who need this.
Oh, you can't see this. Readers can't see. I'm in my office, and right behind me on the bookshelf is 2 of your books. So yes, exactly.
Look at us. Look at us. Yeah.
Also wonderful books.
Yeah.
So.
It's a fantastic book. Even if you've never been a part of spiritual abuse, but you know somebody who has, and you want to learn more about it, and you want to learn how to support them. It's so good, such solid information. So Connie, thanks for writing it.
You're so welcome. Happy to have done it. Happy that it's done. just released it this summer, so
Right.
I'm really happy it's done.
The baby is born.
Oh, the baby's born.
Okay, dear ones, this is the big reveal segment of the show. As promised, our guest is about to reveal some things about herself that you might find controversial. So, this is your reminder to watch how you feel, watch what you're thinking. And if you feel yourself uncomfortable with what she reveals, that's a good thing. After the show, please take some quiet time and ask yourself some questions like, how does this new information make me feel? And can I discount all I've learned from this woman because she thinks or believes differently than me? Or even, am I now questioning her faith? Like, am I wondering if she's really saved? And why? You can do this, friend. Remember, the goal is to build compassion in you. And also remember, disagreeing doesn't mean that we can't be friends. Buckle up, bosser. Here we go. Okay, so it is now time for our big reveal. And Connie, you're aware on this podcast, what we do is I will rapid fire you 2 choices, and you pick one, and then we move on to the next one. And this is the part of the show where you reveal something that could possibly be controversial about yourself. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Now, this one, our listeners may have already picked up from our conversation, but use depression meds or don't use depression meds?
I use depression meds.
Okay. Queer Eye, the show, or no Queer Eye?
Definitely Queer Eye. Love that show.
Okay, last one. Trump, no Trump?
No Trump.
No Trump.
And I really wanted to beg the Republican Party to give me somebody worthy to vote for. So there.
Oh, thank you so much, friend. I just really appreciate you being here. This was so fun. I know it's solid, wonderful information that you given to our listeners. Thank you for being here, and best wishes to you on your book.
Oh, you're so welcome. And you know I was super excited to be on this and be able to share. So thank you, Kathleen.
Hey, it's Kathleen back here again. Did I not tell you? It's, what a story. Every time I hear her talk about the story, and I've heard it many times, it disturbs me. It makes me sad. And like many of our guests on here, I wish I could go back in time and be that supportive friend to her. Wow. Couple things. I'm hoping that you caught this, and I know I'm most likely, like I mentioned, I'm most likely going to have Connie back to the show for season 2. But I hope you caught this thing about power differential, because you might be asking yourself, how do we know that what happened to Connie was actual abuse? And I know we covered a lot of this, but I want to circle back around. Because just like we mentioned in the Whitney Hickerson episode about divorce, often what we hear in our church community, what is explained to us about what has happened in someone's life, often it's not what really happened. I talk about this at the end of episode 4. If you want to hear more about that, feel free. Please go back and listen to my monologue. It's interesting, that monologue, I've had people get in contact with me about that particular monologue that I almost didn't include, but I decided I needed to talk about it. And some women definitely said, thank you for saying what you said. So I'm glad I did. It's important, I think, that we understand that often what we hear is not the full story, as with anything, right? But I want to talk about this feeling you might have as you're listening to Connie's story, as you listen to it, that you wondered what really did happen to her. And didn't she have an affair? She was 25 years old. How is it that you can be 25 years old and have sexual abuse happen to you and you don't stop it. I mean, she's not like a child. And hey, if you were thinking that, friend, no judgment. No judgment from me, because that would have been me probably 5-6 years ago. I've learned a lot since then. I know to not look at things at face value anymore, especially when it comes to abuse. All the rules that you think the world operates on when it comes to abuse, all bets are off. All bets are off. So I want to circle back around to this, because if you are feeling that way and you were struggling to enter her story and really feel the pain and loss because you felt like maybe she was at fault, it's important to me that we talk about that. She mentioned something called power differential. When a pastor has an affair, I'm putting air quotes to that, with a person in their congregation, especially when it's a woman who is younger. Not especially. I mean, that's another layer. Power differential is when somebody has more power than the other person. And in a church, a pastor will always have more power than the members of the congregation. And you may right now go, but no. Yes, friend, he, she always does, because they are the leader. Anytime someone is in a leadership position, especially in a religious leadership position, they have more power than the rest of us, because many times we are looking to them for religious leadership. And often we are looking to them as experts, people who maybe have a little bit more contact with God. I mean, these are people usually who have lots of education, more than most of us when it comes to theology. We look to them for advice. We look to them for their expertise and knowledge of the Bible and what they think God is saying in situations. And because of that, friend, that's why they hold more power. So if you're feeling a little pushback on that, I get it, because I had the same questions when I was first learning about this. And then I realized, oh, they do have more power. Now, just because they have power doesn't mean that's bad. We all have power. We all are in positions of power. If you're a mom, you have power over your kids. If you're a boss, you have power over your employees. We just all do. In all of our relationships, sometimes even in friendships, we have more power. It's weird. That's why we're going to have Connie back, so she can explain more to us about this whole thing of power differential. But power is not bad, but when it's misused, as in Connie's situation, that's when we get into trouble. So Connie, being younger than the pastor, and then also being a member of that church and being mentored by that pastor, is the reason why what happened to her is called abuse. Look at her stuff. Go to her website. She has a definition of abuse if you're unfamiliar with the term. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what the definition was, and it makes sense to me now. So I want to be clear about that. She boldly says she doesn't believe pastors have affairs when that inappropriate relationship is with one of the members of the church. So if you're struggling with that, you're still struggling with it, even after I say this, you need to email me. You don't need to. But if you want to understand this better, you want to not miss this, tell me about it. Let's talk. And Connie's going to have a live Q&A with us in my Patreon group. And if you're a Patreon member, she has volunteered an hour of her time to answer all our questions. So if that's you and you're wondering, how did this happen? And how come she didn't stop it? And, you had the same kind of thought, like, you're 25 years old. Why didn't you stop this? Girl, friend, you're going to want to be there. There's a lot you don't understand. And I would love for you to understand it, because I think we get a lot of this wrong in the church. We get a lot of it wrong in our culture. I loved her advice about how we could be a supportive friend. And hopefully you're seeing a theme here. We get in trouble. We get in trouble when we're trying to be a supportive friend if we get all in somebody's business because we're looking to see who's at fault. And if that's you, if you've been that friend, you wanted to know who was at fault, hey girl, just Grace here. Just Grace. Me too. That was me. That was me. Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you how many times I was trying to determine who was to blame so then I could decide whether they were worthy of my empathy. We're going to talk more and more about empathy in upcoming episodes. I'm going to do some more training, teaching about empathy, things that we just get wrong in our culture. I want to do some more training around grief and why we get it wrong. And it's not because you're bad. It's not because you're not thoughtful and you're not loving, and it's not because you don't want to do the right thing, because I believe, friend, you do. That's why you're here. I want to help us do this better. So I'd highly encourage you to hop on over to my Patreon page, patreon.com/whatshewishesyouknew. And for $2 a month, you can listen to our big reveal extra videos, the interview after the interview. And for $5, you can be a part of these exclusive Q&As. You get to ask the questions and she's willing to answer them. So join us. Thanks so much for being here again, friend. I so appreciate your support. I so appreciate you taking the time to learn these things. And don't forget, you also can have access to your inbox, these questions. Sit and get quiet. Is that what I call it? I can't remember what I call it. It's things to ask yourself if you're feeling uncomfortable. I walk you through it and I give you some next steps. If you are uncomfortable, what can you do next? I sure appreciate you. I love that you're here and that you want to listen and love well. See you next time. Hey friend, did you love this episode of What She Wishes You Knew? I know I did. If you did, head on over to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Something about the Apple Podcast algorithms help people who've never heard this podcast before find it. I'd really appreciate it. And why not share it with a friend? Take a screenshot and text your bestie. And if you're in Apple Podcast, hit the 3 little dots next to this episode and press share. It's easy to do, and your friends are gonna call you their hero. I mean, who wouldn't love that? After all, a sharing friend is a caring friend, and we all know you are definitely a caring friend. Hey, if you'd like to get those get quiet and ask yourself questions I mentioned just before the big reveal sent straight to your inbox, don't forget to check out our Patreon page. Patreon, patreon.com/whatshewishesyouknew. And then we'll make sure to send you a copy of those before every episode. Thanks again.